The stagecoach stopped with a jolt, sending up a thick cloud of red dust that hung in the hot afternoon air. Rebecca Collins stepped down carefully, her worn boots landing on the hard-packed dirt of Main Street. The sun over the Arizona frontier was merciless, bleaching the world into shades of brown and gold. Around her, the small town of Coyote Ridge looked like it had been built out of the desert's bones. Weathered wooden buildings leaned against each other, their signs faded, their windows cloudy with dust. A lone dog barked somewhere, then fell silent. Rebecca took a slow breath and adjusted the small leather pouch hidden beneath the high collar of her black traveling dress. Inside, it was all that remained of her old life, a gold chain that once held her wedding ring. Her husband Thomas had been gone for 3 months now, crushed in the Copper Queen mine collapse. They called it an accident, but Rebecca knew better. Thomas had written her letters warning of the rotting timbers and the mine owner's greed. Those letters had cost him his life. The stagecoach driver tossed her single carpetbag onto the street. "Into the line, ma'am," he said, already tending to his horses. Rebecca nodded, lifting the bag that held everything she owned. The other passengers had gotten off earlier, leaving her completely alone in this silent town. She started walking toward the only building that looked like it might offer a bed for the night. The Grand Hotel, a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a porch that sagged under its own weight. The sign above the door creaked in the wind. As she climbed the steps, she felt eyes watching her from behind curtained windows. A stranger in morning black always stirred curiosity, and judgment came quickly in towns like this. Inside, the hotel lobby smelled of stale tobacco and lye soap. Behind the counter, a thin man with slicked hair looked up from his ledger, his expression turning sour when he saw her. "I'd like a room, please," Rebecca said softly. "A widow traveling alone?" His mouth twisted. "We're full up." "You haven't checked your register," she said, trying to stay polite. "No need," he replied. "We're full." Rebecca had expected this. Every town she'd passed since leaving Bisbee treated her the same. A young widow without family was considered trouble waiting to happen. "I can pay," she said, opening her purse. "Like I said," he repeated coldly, "we're full." Before she could answer, the door swung open behind her. A woman in a bright purple dress stepped inside, perfume filling the room. The clerk's face changed instantly into a wide smile. "Room 12, sugar?" the woman said sweetly. "Of course, Miss Daisy," the clerk replied, handing her a key. Rebecca turned away, the humiliation burning her cheeks. She picked up her bag and stepped back into the sunlight. She tried 4 more boarding houses, and each one gave her the same excuse. No rooms available. By the time the sun began to sink, her feet ached and her hope faded. The world seemed determined to keep her out. At the far end of town stood the Dusty Spur, half saloon, half tavern, with rooms upstairs rented by the hour more often than by the night. The wooden sign above the door swung loosely in the wind. Rebecca hesitated. It wasn't a place for a lady, and she knew it. But darkness was coming, and she couldn't sleep in the street. Taking a steadying breath, she pushed through the swinging doors. The smell of whiskey, sweat, and tobacco filled the air. Men sat hunched over card tables, and women in painted faces drifted among them with bottles and tired smiles. When Rebecca stepped inside, the room fell quiet. Every pair of eyes turned to her. The bartender, a huge man with arms like tree trunks, stopped wiping the counter. "You lost, ma'am?" he asked. "I need a room for the night," Rebecca said firmly. "This ain't exactly the place for a lady," he warned. "I've tried every other place in town." "I can pay." The room buzzed softly with whispers. A proper widow, standing alone in a saloon. The bartender scratched his beard. "Well, I do got 1 room left," he said slowly, "but there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" Rebecca asked. "It's already taken. Fella paid for the week, but he's out of town. Won't be back till tomorrow or the day after. You could use it tonight, long as you're gone when he returns." "That'll be fine," Rebecca said quickly. The bartender hesitated again, glancing toward the crowd. "There's another thing," he said, lowering his voice. "Room's only got 1 bed." The saloon went silent again. All eyes were on her, waiting for her to blush or run. But Rebecca didn't flinch. She was too tired, too worn to care about gossip or judgment. She lifted her chin and met his eyes. "That's perfect," she said clearly. A low whistle came from one of the tables. Laughter followed. The bartender blinked, then nodded. "Your funeral, ma'am. $2 for the night. Rooms at the top of the stairs. Last door on the right." Rebecca paid, her hands steady, though her heart raced. As she climbed the stairs, she could feel the weight of every stair below her. Behind the door, the small room was plain but clean. A narrow bed, a cracked pitcher, a dusty window overlooking the endless prairie. She set down her bag and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time in weeks, she had a roof over her head and a door she could lock. It didn't matter what they thought. She was done trying to fit into a world that punished women for surviving. She lay down fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, the murmur of the saloon below fading into a low hum. "That's perfect," she whispered again, almost smiling. For the first time since Thomas died, she felt safe. Downstairs, a man named Samuel Hayes sat in the corner, his broad shoulders half hidden by the shadow. He'd watched her from the moment she entered, the widow who defied a room full of men with 2 quiet words. He lifted his glass, his gaze never leaving the stairs where she had disappeared. "She's got fire," he murmured to himself. And upstairs, unaware of the cowboy watching her, Rebecca Collins fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. The first light of dawn spilled through the cracked window, painting pale gold across the floorboards. Rebecca stirred, momentarily forgetting where she was. Then, the smell of tobacco and the faint hum of voices from below reminded her. She was in the dusty spur, a place no proper lady would ever step foot in. She sat up, smoothing the wrinkles from her black dress. Her back ached from the hard mattress, but it was the best sleep she'd had in weeks. She tied her hair into a tight bun and stepped outside into the hall. The saloon was quiet now, only the clatter of dishes and the barkeep sweeping the floor. Rebecca slipped out unnoticed and walked into the street, the town already stirring to life. But it didn't take long for her to feel the stares. Curtains fluttered. Women whispered behind their gloved hands. Men tipped their hats, some with mock respect, others with smirks. Word had spread fast. The widow who'd spent the night at the dusty spur. Rebecca kept her chin high and her step steady. She refused to let shame touch her. But when she reached the general store, a voice stopped her cold. "Mrs. Collins!" Sheriff Watson stepped out from the shade beside the bank. His badge caught the morning sun, but there was nothing bright about his eyes. They were cold and sharp, like cut glass. "Sheriff?" she said evenly. "Heard you caused quite a stir last night," he said, circling her slowly. "The dusty spur ain't exactly a place for a respectable widow. You know, this town takes pride in keeping things proper." "It was the only place with a room," she replied. He smirked. "Funny thing. The Territorial Inn had 2 rooms open. Mrs. Morrison at the boarding house had one too. Seems like people just don't like your kind of company." Rebecca's hands tightened on her bag, but she said nothing. "You listen here," Watson said, stepping closer. "We don't need troublemakers in Coyote Ridge. You'll find proper lodging and keep to yourself, or you might discover this town can get real unfriendly, real fast." It wasn't just a warning, it was a threat. "I understand perfectly, Sheriff," Rebecca said quietly. "Good," he said, tipping his hat mockingly. "You have a pleasant day now, Mrs. Collins. And remember, I'm watching." Quote. He strode away, boots crunching on the dust. Rebecca stood still for a moment, her heart pounding, before forcing herself to move. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. At the post office, she asked, after her late husband's cousin, the only reason she'd come to Coyote Ridge in the first place. But the clerk shook his head. "James Collins left town months ago, headed west, I think." That was it, the last thread of her old life gone. She went to the general store next for supplies. The owner, Mr. Garrett, barely looked at her. "Cash only," he grumbled. "I didn't ask for credit," she said. When she reached the counter, he counted her coins slowly, like they might be fake. "Your money's good," he said finally, "but don't linger. This is a family establishment." woman leading 2 children, the woman gasped, pulling them behind her. "The very idea," she hissed to her friend, parading about after spending the night in that den of sin. "Mama, who's that lady?" one of the children asked. "Nobody," the woman snapped. "Nobody at all." Rebecca kept walking, her jaw set. Nobody. That word echoed in her chest like an open wound. She turned down an alley to catch her breath, and froze. 3 rough-looking men blocked her path. "Well, look what we got here," one said, grinning. "The widow Collins. Heard you're looking for accommodations more suited to your tastes." "Excuse me," Rebecca said, trying to step past. The second man blocked her way. "No need to be rude, darlin'. Sheriff says you might need a new line of work. There's a place outside town. Pays well. You'd fit right in. I'm not interested." "Aw, come on now," the first man sneered. "A lady who stays at the Spur shouldn't act all high and mighty. You're already halfway there." Before Rebecca could respond, a shadow fell across the alley. A tall man stood at the entrance, broad-shouldered and calm, one hand resting on his gun belt. "Morning, gentlemen," he said, voice low and steady. "Mrs. Collins." Quote. It was Samuel Hayes, the same man who'd sat quietly in the corner of the saloon the night before. "Are these men bothering you?" "Just having a friendly chat," one of them said, but his grin faded when Samuel stepped closer. "Didn't look friendly from where I stood." Samuel's tone didn't rise, but the danger in it was clear. The men shifted uneasily. "Can't think of anything more cowardly," he continued, "than 3 men cornering a lady. This ain't your business, Hayes." "I'm making it my business," Samuel said. "Mrs. Collins, would you like me to escort you back to the Spur?" "Yes, please," Rebecca said quietly. The men stepped aside, muttering curses. Samuel fell into step beside her, his long strides matching hers. The tension eased once they reached Main Street. "Thank you," she said. "They won't give up," he warned. "Watson's got his eye on you now. You embarrassed him just by surviving." "What am I supposed to do? I have nowhere to go, and no money to get there if I did." Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could work." "Work?" She almost laughed. "Who in this town would hire me?" "I would," he said simply. "I've got a ranch 10 miles out. Need someone who can cook and keep books. My last hand quit, said it was too lonely." Rebecca stopped walking. "Mr. Hayes, you don't even know me." "I know you're brave," he said, "and that you're in trouble through no fault of your own. I know what it's like to be out of place, to have people make up their minds before you even open your mouth." "People will talk," she warned. "Ma'am," he said with a faint smile, "I'm a Union veteran in Confederate country who reads books for fun. Let 'em talk." For the first time in days, Rebecca felt a flicker of warmth in her chest, something like hope. "When would I start?" she asked. "How about now?" he said. "Let's get your things from the Spur and be gone before Watson gets any ideas." As they walked back, Rebecca spotted the sheriff standing outside his office, arms crossed. His eyes followed them, cold and calculating. But for once, she didn't lower her gaze. She had made her choice, and beside her walked a man who didn't laugh, didn't judge, and didn't see her as nobody. The dirt road wound through golden hills and wide skies until the ranch came into view. Rebecca stared in silence. The house was small, weathered by wind and sun, but it stood strong against the emptiness around it. Fences stretched across the dry land, and cattle grazed beyond them. Samuel guided the wagon to a stop and helped her down, his hands gentle but sure. "It's not much," he said. "But it's home." Rebecca looked at the quiet valley, at the way the sunset painted the boards of the house in warm light. "It's perfect," she said softly. He smiled a little at that, the first true smile she'd seen from him. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood smoke and dust. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and shelves lined with books. Rebecca noticed that and raised her eyebrows. "I told you," Samuel said, catching her glance. "I read. Guess that makes me strange out here." Quote. He showed her to a small room with a narrow bed, a basin, and a single window that looked out on the endless prairie. "It's yours," he said. "Used to be for a housekeeper who didn't last long. Said it was too lonely." "I think I'll manage," Rebecca said, setting her carpet bag on the floor. That night, she cooked beans, bacon, and cornbread. It wasn't much, but Samuel ate like a man who hadn't tasted a proper meal in weeks. They talked a little about the land, the cattle, the harsh winters. When the fire burned low, he leaned back and said, "Tomorrow I'll show you the ledgers. They're a mess." "I kept the books for my husband's mine," Rebecca said quietly, "until he died." Samuel nodded, his eyes gentle. "I'm sorry." She hesitated, then told him everything. The mine collapse, the letters Thomas had written about the rotting timbers, the owner's greed. Samuel's jaw tightened as he listened. "Men like that don't deserve peace," he said. "The ones who build their comfort on other people's pain." Rebecca rose to clear the table, her movements careful. "There are men like that everywhere, even here." Samuel watched her. "You sound like you know something." She reached into her carpet bag and pulled out a leather folder. "I found this under a floorboard in my room at the Dusty Spur. Papers, maps, deeds. I thought it might belong to whoever rented it before me." Samuel frowned, opening the folder. Inside were land deeds and letters. The more he read, the darker his expression became. "These are property transfers," he said. "Everyone sold to the same company, Watson Holdings. That's the sheriff's business." Rebecca moved closer. "Look at the prices, all below market. And these notes. Each family had some disaster before selling. A burned barn, a poisoned well, a dead herd." Samuel spread the papers out on the table, tracing a line on one of the maps. "All these properties form a straight path from town to the railroad survey marks. If I'm reading this right, Watson's clearing a corridor for a rail line. Then he's forcing people off their land so he can sell to the railroad for profit," Rebecca said, her pulse quickening. "And Holloway, my husband's old mine owner, he's part of it. Look." She pointed to a letter signed J.H. "That's him, James Holloway." Samuel leaned back, the truth settling heavy in the air. "They're partners. Holloway kills your husband in Bisbee, then sets up the same scheme here with Watson." Rebecca met his gaze. "We have to stop them." He hesitated. "You realize what that means? They'll come after us. You've seen what they do to people who stand in their way." "I ran once," Rebecca said firmly. "I won't run again." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we fight." That night, under lamplight, they made a plan. They'd gather evidence, talk to families who'd lost their land, find witnesses brave enough to stand up. The Hendersons, the Cleararies, the Kowalskis, people Watson had ruined. By dawn, they were riding out. At the Henderson farm, the couple listened in silence as Samuel and Rebecca showed the papers. When they finished, Martha Henderson slammed her cup down. "I told everyone that well didn't just go dry. They poisoned it!" Quote. Her husband nodded grimly, "And Watson said it was our fault." The Cleararies told a similar story. 30 cattle dead overnight, no signs of sickness. Each tale added to the mountain of proof. But Watson noticed their movements. By the time Samuel and Rebecca returned to the ranch that night, 3 riders were watching from the ridge. "Watson's men," Samuel muttered. "He's testing us." That night, shots shattered the window. Samuel grabbed his rifle, pulling Rebecca to the floor as glass rained down. "Stay down," he ordered. They waited in tense silence until the gunfire stopped. "They're gone," he said, checking outside. "Just a warning." Rebecca's heart pounded, but she steadied her breath. "Then we keep going. They're afraid." The next morning, help arrived. Pete Clearary and 2 other men rode up, bringing news. "Grafton Ranch burned last night," Pete said grimly. "The Kowalskis barely got out. Watson's cleaning up loose ends." "Then we move fast," Samuel said. "We'll take this to Judge Thorne before he destroys more lives." Quote. By midnight, the ranch had become a meeting place. Survivors crowded the small house. Families, ranchers, widows. They brought stories, old letters, receipts, anything that might prove Watson's crimes. Judge Thorne himself arrived, listening with sharp eyes as Rebecca laid out every detail. When he saw the letter signed by Holloway, his face hardened. If we bring this to Prescott, the marshal will have no choice but to act, but you'll need to testify, Mrs. Collins. It will make you a target." Rebecca didn't hesitate. "I already am." The next morning, she and the judge rode to town to confront Doris McKenna, the saloon woman who knew everyone's secrets. Doris opened her door, eyes tired but sharp. When Rebecca told her everything, Doris went quiet. "Watson thinks we don't listen," she said at last. "But I hear plenty. I kept his letters, his payments, his plans. Maybe it's time someone used them." Before Rebecca could thank her, the door burst open. Watson stood there with his deputy's gun drawn. "Conspiracy, is it? You think you can ruin me?" But justice had already come. Outside, the sound of hooves thundered. Samuel and a dozen ranchers surrounded the building, rifles raised. "Drop it, Watson," Samuel called. "It's over." Watson hesitated, then reached for his weapon. The shot rang out, loud and final. Samuel's bullet struck his hand, knocking the gun away. The townsfolk poured into the street. They'd had enough of fear. Within minutes, Watson was shackled. His crimes, and Holloway's, were dragged into the light for all to see. Days later, at the hearing, Rebecca's testimony silenced the crowd. She told them about the letters, the mine collapse, and the land theft. Doris produced Watson's written orders, and the people gasped. When the judge declared both men guilty of fraud and murder, the room erupted. Outside, families wept and cheered. The stolen lands would be returned. Coyote Ridge was finally free. Samuel found Rebecca among the crowd, his arm still bandaged from the fight. She turned to him with tears shining in her eyes. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected. He took her hand. "Stay with me, Rebecca, not as my bookkeeper, as my wife." For the first time in months, she laughed, a real bright sound that carried across the square. "That's perfect," she whispered. Months later, the ranch was alive again. Fields green, laughter in the air. Rebecca and Samuel worked side by side, building a life forged from struggle and courage. The people of Coyote Ridge called her the widow who saved the town. But Samuel just called her home. And every night, when they lay together in the same narrow bed that once symbolized scandal, Rebecca would smile and think of how it all began, with a single, fearless answer to a world that wanted her to be ashamed. "That's perfect,"